30th of April 2010, we finally left New Zealand as winter was slowly drawing in. Compared to many, we had a fairly good passage, except it almost ended on our first day out. During the night, we unfortunately hit a sleeping whale, causing the boat to shudder and sway from one side to the other. Our first thought was that the mast had broken. Thankfully, it was still standing, and after a few checks, John declared that no damage had been done and that we could carry on. After 5 days, the weather started to deteriorate, hence we headed for North Minerva Reef. On arrival, we battled 25 to 30 knots of wind on the nose and a 4-knot current against us as we struggled through the pass. Welcome to North Minerva Reef, where it blew and rained for the best part of 10 days.
Yellow-eyed, pink-mouthed, spotted snapper or something.
As soon as weather permitted, we left on an easterly breeze for Nuku'alofa, Tonga. Unfortunately, during the first night the wind shifted to the northeast and increased in force. By noon the following day it was apparent that we were not going to make Nuku'alofa on this window. Thus, with our fresh water supply at rock bottom, we had no alternative but to head for Savu Savu in Fiji. Having cleared in, we checked out the latest weather forecast and discovered another window to get us to Tonga, provided we left within the next 24 hours. Unfortunately, clearing out of Fiji is not a simple matter and is subject to many delays. Thus we were almost 24 hours behind schedule when we finally got underway. The trip went as planned until on the third day the window closed and we could no longer point the bow. Hence we bore off to Neo Tapu Tapu at the northern end of the Tongan group.
A year before our arrival, a devastating tsunami had hit the island with several lives lost. We were surprised that the effects of the tsunami were still very visible, especially along the waterfront, where many people were still living in tents, as if the wave had passed only last week. Many women can be seen along the shoreline washing strips of palm leaves that are then hung out to dry before being used for making mats or traditional costumes. Although there wasn't too much to see or do on the island, we soon made friends with Thomas and Kirsten on the yacht Freya, who were also in the anchorage waiting for a window to leave and glad of some company. Most days were spent discussing weather or joining the locals in various activities.
Do
you want a hand?
We'll see you shortly, yeah?
Yeah, will do. Thank you for the lift. We had made friends with Sia and her family, who invited us all into their home for a traditional Tongan meal known as an umu, which comprises of pig or piglet and fresh fish cooked in an earthen oven.
It tastes good.
That doesn't taste anything.
Some water because we drink water, every water.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Here's some lime juice here if you'd like.
After 10 days in Neo Tapu Tapu there was finally a window. We left with Freya on an easterly wind that remained all the way down to Vavau. En route we managed to contact Entract, who had just left Pago Pago, also for Vavau.
Mr. John,
Entract, Mr. John.
Hey, John.
It was good to be in Tonga at long last and great to be back in Vavau. We had sailed an extra 800 miles in getting here from New Zealand, but it was worth it to avoid all the bad weather, the motoring and the crashing to windward. It was now time to start cruising and get some enjoyment out of having come all this way.
Texas Ted, our mascot, was dressed as a Tongan warrior and was ready to meet the locals.
We hadn't been on our mooring long when Entract arrived, just in time for a Tongan feast ashore.
Nice people.
Are you happy to be in Tonga?
Oh yes.
Is it finally met up with you guys after such a long time?
It's about the historical places in Vavau.
One of the reasons for getting to Tonga was to hand over 2 marine batteries for Ed and Ellen, which they desperately needed and we had carried all the way from New Zealand. Whilst in Vavau, we were fortunate to witness a visit by 4 Vakas, supposedly replica Polynesian sailing canoes. Constructed in New Zealand, these canoes had been visiting island groups in the South Pacific as far east as Tahiti. However, on close examination, these were very high-tech vessels, with solar-powered propulsion units and Kevlar lashings. The arrival of the Wakas prompted a large welcoming party on the quay. One of the attractions in Vavau was the Giggling Whale, owned and run by Sandy Best, a gregarious and generous restaurateur, who, as it turned out, was an old school chum of mine.
Morning everybody, this is Sandy and Kathy from the Giggling Whale. We're located on the waterfront right above the moorings, the red roof sail loft. Wednesday today is the Hansia Brothers, one of the best bands in Tonga. It's a free show, there's Carver, and there's some school kids coming along to dance for you guys, trying to raise some money for their school fees.
If you're from New York, well, you're probably gay. These are my Tongan friends and they sit with me. You should sit down and have Tongan tea. Carver through a sock is fun. You can wake up in the morning sun.
Before we left for the Hapai group, we said goodbye to Kirsten and Thomas, who were on their way to Australia, hoping that someday our paths would cross again. After the hectic social life of Vavau, we needed a rest and took off south to the Hapai group. Only 60 miles geographically separates these groups, but they are a world apart in their ambience. The Hapai is relaxed and laid back with good fishing and snorkeling, and it was here we celebrated Ellen's birthday with a sushi night.
It probably is sauerkraut.
I was going to say, don't drop the hot dog. Get it. No, get it and wash it.
Oh no! I get it. You've got a shovel here.
No, this is Tonga.
I would have put them the other way around actually. You might be better off with them the other way. So
Get it quick.
Actually, wash these off.
Wash it off. I'll eat it.
Yeah, I've got some fresh water. Maybe we better wash it in salt first. I don't know.
Wash it in salt. Don't cook it with the...
On the edges, jotting at the top of the page and around the edges.
Cremated weenies.
Oh, queen for a day. Don't let it in.
One knacker chicken.
Did you read the thing from Croatia?
Having returned to Vavau, Ed and Ellen were invited to play with the Hauser brothers at their home in the hope of producing a record. We went along to administer video and sound recording. It was a lively night of jamming, the recordings turned out first class, and Ed produced a great CD for them.
Another reason for our return to Tonga was the opportunity to spend time with the humpback whales, which frequent the bays and lagoons of Vavau during the months of July and August. During this period they come to birth calves and mate in a yearly ritual which carries them thousands of miles from their Antarctic feeding grounds to the warm waters off Tonga.
Fortunately for us, we had the unique opportunity to swim alongside the whales in their own environment under guidance from a very experienced diver and conservationist. Karen from Diver Vow put us as close to the whales as we were ever likely to get. However, as she explained, our meeting was totally at the discretion of the whales. They are naturally curious and come to see the swimmers rather than the other way round.
Two whales, one, other one underwater.
Yeah, there's one right here.
Two, the other one's coming up, both coming up, one, two, and down.
Soon after our wonderful experience with the whales, we temporarily parted with Entract and made the 3-day passage across to Savu Savu in Fiji.
With the dawn of the new millennium and many thousand years of evolution, we bring you the rich and unique sounds of our Pacific homeland. Our idyllic islands which conjure up images of paradise. These are voices of nature, the voice of our people, expressing the flavor, image, and rich heritage of our paradise we call Fiji.
Vanuatu, Big Island, with its languid pace of life, peaceful landscapes and lack of tourist infrastructure, has a very different feel. On the island's south coast, nestled against a sweeping bay, lies the small and pretty town of Savu Savu. Backed by sloping green hills and strung out along the main street are restaurants, stores and bars with a rich aroma of spices.
After settling on our well-protected mooring opposite the copper shed, that once started life as a copper mill in the late 1800s, but now serves as a focal point for tourists, we found Dolly at the marina office. With her help, we soon had our permits to go to the northeast of Vanuatu and set off to explore. Upon leaving Savu Savu, our first stop was Nasu Savu for the night, then on to Vianney Bay, where the beauty of this picturesque and tranquil area took us by surprise. Using the great weather, which had fortunately arrived, we pushed on the very next day, trying to move as far east as possible before the trade winds returned.
Our next stopping point was Kioa and then Rambi Island. Sailing between the many reefs can be rather tricky at times, needing a lot of concentration. Many times the boiling waters rushing over the shallows due to the strong tides and currents would produce an adrenaline rush of the worst type. Here in Catherine Bay, Rambi is quite different from the islands that surround it. The people are of Kiribati extraction and maintain their culture and their language. The first thing we noticed were the typically Kiribati sailing canoes, which are expertly handled and venture far offshore, and can be seen sailing up and down the island.
Ashore, we were greeted by many of the locals and surrounded by inquisitive children. We paid a visit to the church that had been partially destroyed in a hurricane which struck the area in March the previous year. Despite the lack of materials and money, they were doing their very best to restore the damage.
Well, yeah, dude, that's it's going good.
How are you doing?
You got another ball today, huh?
A day sail from Catherine Bay took us up to Albert Cove on the northwest of Rambi, where we made friends with Maolu and Asiti, a lovely old couple who were struggling to put their home back together following the hurricane. They and just a handful of locals occupied just a small section of the beautiful palm fringe crescent-shaped beach, which was just picture postcard perfect. After 2 weeks, we managed to drag ourselves away and made tracks back to Savo Savo to meet up with Entract. First, Texas Ted had to be groomed. There wasn't too much to keep us in Savu Savu, and so with Entract we moved on down to Coral Island. We weren't too impressed with the anchorage here due to the heavy downdrafts and permanent cloud that seems to envelop the island, so after one night we moved on down to Makongai Island.
Ashore in Makongai, we found an active marine conservancy, growing clamshells, rehabilitating turtles and monitoring whales. After a tour of the facilities, we were invited to join the whale watchers at the top of Heart Attack Hill, which turned out to be a tough vertical slog. Back in the late 30s, whales came this way in great numbers. Now they are lucky to see more than one a week. This study is intended to assess how many and of what species of whales are frequenting this area now.
From Makongai Island, we day sailed across to Hurricane Hole on Overlau, where we stayed for 5 days relaxing in this calm anchorage. Unfortunately, our permit didn't allow us to go ashore, but that made little difference as we had plenty to do on board. When a good weather window materialised, we then sailed down to Suva on BT Levu, arriving at the pass just as the sun was setting. After we had checked in both boats with Suva Customs, we set out about the jobs we had specifically come here to do. The life raft service was foremost on our list, but to our surprise our bottom tube didn't inflate due to a broken valve which may have been broken from new. Ed and Ellen's raft had a small hole in the floor, which was a simple fix with a patch and some glue.
Kava is a big thing in Fiji. It is by custom the national drink and is used ceremoniously on many occasions. We give kava to the chief of the villages ashore where we anchor as an introduction and a request for freedom of movement in that particular area. Kava comes in many forms, such as powder, root, or anything between. The secret is to get the right stuff. Another reason for returning to Suva was that this was where it all began for us. This was where Paula first set foot on Mr. John 4 and started her circumnavigation. Now, 20 years later, we were again at the Royal Suva Yacht Club. It was time for a celebration, and who better to celebrate with than our lifelong friends Ed and Ellen. We're going to raise a toast to Paula, my better half, who wasn't my better half 20 odd years ago, but is now. A few moments after 20 years ago she was, and she has been ever since.
Where are we?
Here we are back again in Suva in Fiji after a complete circumnavigation for my fair lady here. And we should congratulate her for sticking with me for 20 years and crashing around the world, which must be a test for anybody.
And we raise our glasses.
Of course, I raised my cup because after 20 years of this bashing around the world, I've given up the sauce. Say something, Paula.
Well, I never thought I'd come back to Suva, and I could never have done it without John. And Suva does look different from 20 years ago, but then I didn't notice anything 20 years ago because I was getting too much loving from one man, and it's never stopped.
There you go. Couldn't keep my hands off then, couldn't keep my hands off now. Our next stop was Benga Island, which was a one-night stopover. It would have been longer had we not been subject to some vicious downdrafting off the surrounding hills. Hence, we moved on the next morning to Vuna Niu Harbour, where Ed and Ellen put on a good show of tacking into the anchorage, having had an oil pipe burst on their engine. The following morning we were off again and had a boisterous trip down to Thurvu Harbour, where we anchored off the Fijian Hotel Resort. This was not a particularly great anchorage, but it gave us access to the Kula Eco Park, a short distance down the road. Be relaxed. Do you feel relaxed?
No.
Oh no, you've definitely got a few of these.
Fine.
Somewhere in Costa Rica. And in the morning there was a slightly bigger version of him.
Yeah, they got very huge.
Where's he going? Here we were fortunate to make the acquaintance of David, the children's entertainer at the resort, and one evening we had a little sing-along.
All men and rich gather round her, finest lady, and like that dusty lady on the sky, with the good moonshine, she drops in my eye. Bounty road, take me home to the place, round it all, West Virginia.
From Thurvu Harbour we moved on into Nandi Waters and to Denaroo. Happy birthday.
Alright, I'll take it. Fijian Girl Scout cookies.
Look around! Look around!
After saying goodbye to Entr'acte as they were laying their boat up in Vuda Point Marina to fly home, we departed Fiji for the long voyage north. 614 miles and 6 days later, after reasonable passage, we anchored off Funafuti Tuvalu on November the 3rd. Whilst Funafuti offers a good anchorage in normal trade wind conditions, it has little of interest ashore. The island is 3 miles long and 1/3 of a mile at its widest. With over 9,000 inhabitants, it is extremely overcrowded, has few shops and no fresh produce. The people were very reserved and few understood English. From Funafuti we headed further north to Kiribati, crossing the equator en route to Taurawa and the port of Baisio. Although we had quite a good passage, followed close by hundreds of friendly dolphins, we did encounter one slight problem with our furling genoa, which needed to be repaired en route. Located almost on the equator, Taurawa Atoll is 40 kilometres in length but only a few hundred yards in breadth and encompasses a large lagoon, and the anchorage was somewhat terrible.
Taurawa was not that much different from Funafuti, except the people were incredibly friendly and interesting to talk to. Although it was good to see the thatched roof huts, the overcrowding was very obvious along with the rubbish that was everywhere. Even the grave sites behind the wire fencing were no exception. This is one of the poorest islands in Micronesia, with 40% of the population being children under 15 years of age.
main attractions are the relics left over from World War II that can be seen in various states of decay around the island. The Americans lost over 1,600 men and another 2,300 wounded. About 4,700 Japanese soldiers and Korean labourers were killed in one of the biggest amphibious landings ever undertaken in the Pacific.
Yeah, we rented a car like that too and went down low like that, but the grass wasn't that tall.
Within a few days, after arranging our clearance and permit, we were ready to move on. In less than 24 hours, we were at Butaritari Atoll, where we met up with Rebecca and Patrick on Brick House. Butaritari Island is about 4 miles long and 1/3 of a mile wide, and occupies the southwest corner of the atoll.
Thank you very much, John Marvel.
Okay, thank you very much.
First sighted in 1606 by the Spanish explorer Pedro Fernández de Quiros, the way of life here is basically unchanged. The setting is naturally rural, and the people still depend upon the sea and land for daily living and earning income. The people value the importance of family and respect of the elderly. Over the years, Western values have made some material inroads into this culture, but otherwise it remains much as it always was. The Maniaba meeting place is the focal point of each village. Here council meets, social events and feasts are held, and the locals spend much of their time. Where we could, we helped out with any small technical problems that needed attention, for which we were always well rewarded.
Okay, good. We know what side to turn on.
The other one?
Fantastic. Very nice.
We also sampled the local drink, toddy, which is the fermented sap of a coconut tree caught in hanging bottles. The longer it is left to ferment, the more alcoholic it becomes. To some, it is an acquired taste.
After a few days in Butaritari village, we were invited to see the World War II remembrance at the school in Yukiangang village. So Rebecca and I took the first truck that came along and rode with the locals whilst John and Patrick walked the 3 kilometres. During the 19th century, Butaritari was the home of Robert Louis Stevenson, and when World War II arrived, the island was occupied by the Japanese. On the 20th of November 1943, the Americans invaded Butaritari, displacing the Japanese, and every year the islanders remember this day that brought them their freedom at the cost of many American lives.
taste to it. Like took it out,
After our pleasant stay in Butari Tari village, we moved further up the atoll to Kuma village at the eastern end of the lagoon. This turned out to be our favourite place in all of Kiribati. The village was by far the prettiest we had seen for quite a while. The villagers were industrious and always busy. We were invited by Barrio and Arita to attend their wedding. Rebecca and I helped out with making the bride's bouquet. What they really needed was a photographer, and I was happy to oblige. The school was a big surprise for us. We had on many occasions been greeted by lots of children who all wanted to know our names and where we came from. They seemed well behaved and spoke good English, as we found out when visiting the school, and what a surprise they had for us.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And toes, heads and shoulders, knees and toes, eyes, ears, mouth and nose.
shiny nose. And if you ever saw him, you could even say has clothes. All of the other. The Marshall Islands are 3 days north of Butari Tari, but a world apart in both climate and culture. We arrived in time for the Christmas party, organised by the Yacht Club, and celebrated New Year with Jim and Kim from the Yacht Auspice at a block party downtown.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me
Oh my goodness! What are all these?
Who are birthday presents?
You're kidding!
Well, just one or two, you deserve them. Well, special girl requires special presents.
You could have waited till I put something decent on in my hands. Majro, which is the capital of the Marshall Islands, is situated in the middle of the Intertropical Conversion Zone, ITCZ, and this determined everything we could do. We organised our lives around monstrous squalls, gale force winds and copious amounts of rain. Good weather days were very few and far between. Our stay was livened up by several acts of piracy, many carried out by scuba divers in the anchorage, most of which were repulsed due to the diligence of the surrounding yachts. This did not improve our overall perception of the place. A few miles from the downtown anchorage were two retreats, one of which was Enimanit Island. Here the water was clearer and much less polluted than off the town. Snorkeling amongst the coral and artificial reefs turned out much better than expected. Fortunately, Majro is not the subtotal of the Marshall Islands, and there are many beautiful places to be explored. As soon as weather permitted, we set off to Malolap Atoll, about 100 miles north. On arrival, we paid our visitor's fee. Fees are levied for each island individually. Jim, the local police officer, collected ours, after which we were then permitted to explore. Compared with Kiribati, we found the Marshallese very reserved, and communication was difficult except with the pastor and some of the children, who had picked up English from watching movies. The main attractions and reasons for visiting Malolap are the numerous ruins and relics from World War II, which can be seen slowly crumbling away all over the atoll and in the adjacent waters. This was once a Japanese command center and major airbase for the area.
Bye.
After a few days in Tarawa, during which we organised our permit, we left for Abiang, a short distance to the north. Well known for its sparkling blue lagoon and white sandy beaches, this beautiful island has been a focus for tourism within the group. Anchoring off Tanimaki village, we met Tioka and Barenga, who spoke quite good English and were able to give us an insight into their way of life, especially in the production of copra, which is the main source of income for the islanders. Whilst we Westerners think of the coconut as a drink or an additive for curries, out here on the island, the coconut palm is a chief provider of almost everything the islanders need. The main use of the coconut is for copra, which is drained, broken coconut shells dried in the sun. After 3 days of drying, they are bagged and taken to the village for weighing and shipping. The husk is removed in this process and stored for other uses. Nothing is wasted when it comes to coconuts. Other uses of the coconut include the production of coconut oil and grated coconut, which are sold in Tarawa and used in almost every meal, including feeding the pigs.
Not only is the husk used for fires, it is also used for making the senet rope, which is used in all traditional building projects. The palm tree provides the structure for the buildings, and its leaves provide the thatchings for the roof, the mats for the floors and sleeping on. As usual, the children were happy to see us and were keen to pose for photographs. Not so keen, however, when it came to taking their worming tablet from the local nurse. The school had just received an ultimatum from government: either build bigger classrooms or be closed down. The village council therefore decreed that everyone would be involved in construction of the new school. Money was being raised from bingo sessions and any other way they could. Tasks were assigned to each family. Some had to produce rope, some roofing, others matting. Eventually, all these things would be brought together in the erection of the new school buildings.
After 3 enjoyable weeks, we finally said goodbye to our hosts and returned to Tarawa, where we took clearance and departed for Otuma. Leaving Tarawa, we picked up a fresh southeasterly breeze and had to work hard to stay on our course line, but as we got further south, conditions improved.
found anchorage off a small jetty in the northeast corner of the island. Unfortunately, protection from the swell was limited and we rolled heavily. After clearance into Fiji, we discovered that the local bus had been withdrawn. It is almost 10 kilometers one way to the government station, and without transport this turned out to be tough going. After 7 kilometers we were forced to turn back. The people we met were incredibly friendly and hospitable, and we really wish we could have found some way to explore this island further, but due to the rolling anchorage and the lack of transportation, our stay was curtailed, and hence we left for the mainland in Fiji, completing our trip up north.